Israeli Party System and Politics, 1948 to 2003. The Knesset. Israel's parliament is called the Knesset. Knesset has 120 seats. Elections for the Knesset are held every 4 years unless members of the Knesset call for an earlier election. The seats for the Knesset are allotted proportionally based on how many votes a given party gets. Every party submits a list of candidates, and the seats are given to those candidates in order based on how many seats they have. In Israel's short history, there has never been a party that has received enough votes to own a majority of the seats in the Knesset. Because of this, majority parties need to make agreements with smaller parties to form coalitions. The party that receives the most votes is allowed 42 days to create a coalition with minority parties before the second largest party is allowed this opportunity. There is also a minimum threshold for votes for a party in order to receive a seat at the Knesset. Votes that don't meet the minimum threshold are split proportionally among the parties that do meet the threshold. The ministries. The party that gets the most votes has the duty of filling the ministry positions. Heads of these ministries come together to make the cabinet of the prime minister. There are 34 government ministry offices in the current government in Israel, with the most important one being the prime minister's office. Some of the other bigger positions included Deputy Prime Minister, Defense Minister, Foreign Minister, National Security Minister, and Strategic Affairs Minister. The Majority Party elects their top candidate to be the Prime Minister. The Majority Party also fills some of the more important roles with representatives from their party. Some of the smaller ministry positions are left open to be used as a negotiation tactic to lure smaller parties into a majority party's coalition. For example, the Shas Party and Otzma Yehudit Party hold 9 and 3 seats in the cabinet, respectively. Beginning of the Israeli party system. It is important to note that the Israeli government was conceived during wartime in 1948. First two branches established were the executive branch and the legal branch. The provisional government represented the executive branch, and the provisional state council represented the legal branch. David Ben-Gurion described the powers of the provisional government as having exclusive authority in all matters with which it has been empowered, including security, transportation, supply, policy, trade and industry, labor, public works, manpower, agriculture, and immigration. These were wartime powers that were given to the different governmental branches to get the country through a war at its inception. The first elections. Israel was able to hold their first elections in January 1949. This was the transitional time for the provisional government to the elected government. In this election, 21 parties took part in it, but only 12 parties reached the vote threshold to earn seats in the Knesset. The most popular party was the Mapai Party, a left-wing party that would later become the modern-day Labor Party. The Mapai Party was led by David Ben-Gurion. They received 35.72% of the votes and 46 seats in the Knesset. While this was not the most lopsided election in Israeli history, it was a commanding win for a liberal group tasked with building a country. 1977 election. From 1949 to 1977, the Israeli government was dominated by the left-wing Labor Party. In 1977, however, a new party, the Likud Party, earned the most seats in the Knesset. The Likud Party is the major right-wing party in Israel. The Likud won 33.41% of the vote, and the Labor Party won 24.6% of the vote. There were two major changes that were brought about from this election. Simply, the country had to pivot from being run by a left-wing government to being run by a right-wing government. The country started to take a more conservative approach rather than the liberal approach of the previous 28 years. One reason the country moved to a more conservative government was because of the Israeli-Arab conflict. Israelis felt that the right-wing parties would stray away from any two-state solutions that the Arab side would offer. Another change was the alignment of the religious parties in the Knesset. Issues with the Israeli government. One major issue that became apparent in certain elections was the power that smaller parties could hold in close elections. These smaller parties became similar to swing states in U.S. elections. While the majority party gets the first chance to create a coalition, if enough smaller parties hold out, they won't be able to create one. This creates a lot of leverage for smaller parties in closer elections when a major party does not have a large lead over the second party. This was first seen in 1977 when the religious parties changed the coalition they supported when the Likud Party received the most Knesset seats. These shortcomings were highlighted again in the 1984 and 1988 elections. The 1984 and 1988 elections. These two elections were the closest between the Likud and Labor parties. In 1984, the Labor Party, led by Shimon Peres, gained 34.9% of the votes, while the Likud Party, led by Yitzhak Shamir, gained 31.9% of the votes. In 1988, the Likud Party gained 31.1% of the votes, and the Labor Party gained 30.0% of the votes. The 1984 election was separated by 3 Knesset seats, and the 1988 election was separated by 1 Knesset seat. These elections were so close because of the uncertainty in Israel at the time. Part of the country wanted to focus on the Israeli Defense Force presence in Lebanon. The other part of the country wanted to focus on their economic crisis and increased inflation. The smaller parties held more power than ever. Once again, the religious parties were the one causing issues. Shimon Peres had issues making a coalition because a rabbi who did not even live in Israel was advising a religious party against joining Peres' coalition. 1992 election. In 1992, the Labor Party won a majority of seats and was able to create a coalition again for the first time since before the 1977 elections. This election was not as close as recent elections. The Labor Party gained 34.7% of the votes, and the Likud Party gained 24.9% of the votes. Voter turnout for the 1992 election was 77.4%, similar to prior elections. One reason that the Labor Party was able to take a bigger percentage of the votes was because many smaller right-wing parties did not meet the voting threshold. They did not hold seats in the Knesset, and those votes were distributed proportionally throughout right-wing and left-wing parties. So votes that were meant to go only to right-wing parties were now distributed amongst any party regardless of affiliation. This led to a loss in momentum for the Likud Party and right-wing politics in Israel for a little while. Israeli politics from 1996 to 2003. In 1996, the Prime Minister was elected separately from the Knesset elections. In this election, the Labor Party won the most seats in the Knesset, but Benjamin Netanyahu of the Likud Party won the Prime Minister seat. Netanyahu beat Shimon Peres by less than 1% of the vote. One main reason for this turnout was the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin was assassinated on November 4, 1995, while he was serving as Prime Minister and representing the Labor Party. Peres scrambled to campaign and called for an early election that ultimately won his party the majority in the Knesset, but lost him the Prime Minister election. The process of electing the Prime Minister separate from the Knesset parties lasted until 2003. In 2003, the voting returned to voting for the Knesset seats, and then the majority party appoints their leader as the Prime Minister. Since 2003, the voting and elections have stayed constant through present day. The Likud Party and the Labor Party both remain as the two major parties in Israeli politics. Thank you.